So if you are blessed with a lot, you've got to ask, why did God give me this? And the answer is, he gave it to you so that you could channel it to the needs around you. He did not give it to you to hoard or to live in self-indulgence. Money's not wrong. And being wealthy is definitely not a sin. But three things, James says, characterize proud, world-centered wealth. Here they are. Number one, verse 3, hoarding. Verse hoarding. And I'm not talking about hoarding like, you have a trailer and you live up to your eyeballs and you clothes that you wore 25 years ago. Not that kind of hoarding. He's talking about hoarding your savings. James says, you have laid up for yourselves treasures for the last days. Saving is not wrong, of course. Proverbs commends certain kinds of saving up money so that you're not a burden on others when you're older or because you want to provide for others. The book of Proverbs calls that wise. But just piling up wealth on earth, especially at the expense of generosity or in a way that ignores the needs of others, that is evil, James says. Now, I know your question when I say that as well. Pastor, how much can you save up before it's considered hoarding? Of course, there's no magic number that I can give to you. You just need to take passages like this one really seriously. At the Summit Church, we say that we should save sufficiently and give extravagantly rather than give sufficiently and save extravagantly. I would dare say that most of you listening to me right now, most of you in here, you give some and you save some. So the question is which one do you do sufficiently and which one do you do extravagantly? Which leads me to the second thing that James says characterizes worldly wealth. Number 2, verse 5, self-indulgence. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. We're not talking about simply enjoying a few nice things here, driving a reliable car, being able to bless your family with a college education or the occasional nice vacation. James is saying you live in a way totally disconnected from the people around you and their needs. And particularly, he's talking about when you do things to flaunt your wealth, when the clothes you wear or the bags you carry or the watches you wear or the cars you drive or the neighborhoods you live in is supposed to make a statement about you. Now again, you say, well, Pastor, how much is too much? When do you cross that line? Well, here again, the question is one of proportion. I would say that most of you in here have some nice stuff, and most of you in here give. So again, the question is, which one do you do sufficiently and which one do you do extravagantly? Do you live sufficiently and give extravagantly, or do you, whatever the opposite of what I just said is, live sufficiently and give extravagantly? Here's what I challenge you to do as a family this week, whether married, kid, get your kids together and do this, or just do it as a single person. Write out these 3 words: spending, saving, giving. And then ask yourself, which ones do we as a family do sufficiently and which ones do we do extravagantly? Here's characteristic number 3. Verse 4, James says, injustice. Verse 4, James says that the way you got this money was by exploiting and defrauding others. James is probably here not talking about outright theft. He's talking about those ways that the wealthy can manipulate the legal system to keep people from their due. For example, employers who pay low wages or delayed wages just because they can, or who use their wealth to manipulate the court system to benefit themselves, even if it's not entirely fair to others. Listen, I want to be really, really careful here in how I say this. There are a lot of people in our tradition who oppose things like the Affordable Care Act, and we hate discussions about raising the minimum wage. And I know many of you think that because you think those kinds of government impositions onto the market do more harm than good. Free enterprise, you say, is the only thing that prospers everybody in the society. And I am not here to debate that one way or the other. That is not my calling to tell you how to think about that. I understand that line of reasoning, and in many ways, I am very sympathetic to it. What I am saying, what James is saying, is that Christians shouldn't need government mandated programs to treat their workers justly and fairly and generously, right? James is not talking about government programs here. He's saying that regardless of your politics or whatever political solutions you think help society, the poor around you are your responsibility. So if you run a business, your question is not just, what am I legally required to do? It ought to be, how can I take care of my employees in ways that are just, even generous? It means that those people in your small groups, it means in our neighborhoods, our kids' friends at school, we shouldn't need the government to tell us to take care of them. We should just do it. In the early days of the church was the soup kitchen. It was orphan care. It was foster care. It was welfare. In fact, I've always loved the words of historian Eberhard Arnold, who talks about those first few centuries of Christianity. Listen to this. Most astounding to the outside observer was the extent to which poverty was overcome in the vicinity of the communities of Christians through voluntary works of love. Christians spent more money in the streets than the followers of other religions spent in their temples. The Roman Emperor Julian, one of the early Christians' primary persecutors, said in disgust about the Christians, "It is a scandal that there is not a single Christian who is a beggar. Those godless Galileans care not only for their own poor, but for ours as well, while those who belong to us look in vain for the help that we should render to them." Talk about something from your enemies you want to hear. That's what I want to hear. CNN does an article on us. That's what I want to talk about right there. I do not think it is possible to overstate how seriously God takes this. But just read again the words of chapter 5. Come now, you rich. Weep and howl for the miseries that are about to come on you. You lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence while people around you were starving and they were in need. And so you fattened your hearts as in a day of slaughter. James says to rich people, you think you're living it up now. Your lives are fat with money. But in God's eyes, you're just fattening yourself up for the day of slaughter. A couple of years ago, Veronica and I went on a mission trip to visit some of our missionaries in Germany and Eastern Europe. Two of the ones we went to see were Rich and Julia Rudolph, who were at the time living in this small rural village out on the German countryside. We got to their house really, really late at night, so we couldn't really take in our surroundings. But when we got up the next morning, I pulled back the shade of our window, and right outside of our window, y'all, was the most idyllic German hillside I've ever laid my eyes on. I mean, 6 or 7 sheep grazing on this vast green hillside flanked by the mountains. The windmill you could see off in the distance. At any moment, I was expecting the little Swiss Miss girl with blonde pigtails to come dancing out, or Captain Von Trapp to come out singing Edelweiss or whatever. It was perfect. These sheep looked like they were living the dream. But as I'm looking at this countryside, these sheep, just nothing to do but graze all day and in this beautiful setting, only one word pops in my mind: mutton, or lamb shanks. I guess that's probably 2 words, but you see right over the hillside, you could see the slaughterhouse. And these sheep were being prepared for the day of slaughter. Their idyllic lives were an illusion. And James says that's what the lives of the rich are like. This hoarding, self-indulgent, luxurious life is fattening you up for when God executes justice on behalf of the poor, when he says, I heard their cries and I was listening. And you took what I gave to you and you did not use it for the purposes I gave it to you for. Here's the question James wants those of us who have money to consider. The question is, why did God give that money to you? After all, didn't we just see in James 4 that at the end of the day, it was God who made us rich? Wasn't that the whole point of James 4? So if God's the one that actually caused you to prosper, you got to ask, what was his purpose in making you rich? At the Summit Church, we use the word steward to describe the relationship that we're supposed to have to our finances. A steward understands that none of what they have truly belongs to them. Everything, our time, our treasure, our talents, they're given to us by God for a purpose, and our responsibility as stewards is to figure out what that purpose is and then fulfill it. So if you are blessed with a lot, you've got to ask, why did God give me this? And the answer is, he gave it to you so that you could channel it to the needs around you. He did not give it to you to hoard or to live in self-indulgence. You parents that, say that you learned there's a really poor kid at your kid's school who never has anything to eat at lunch. So as you're preparing your son's lunch for the day, you pack him 2 of everything. But you get busy and you forget to tell him why you did that. All he knows is that when he opens up his lunchbox at lunch, he's got 2 of everything. And right beside him is this kid with nothing. As a parent, what would you hope that your kid does in that moment instinctively? Would you hope that he would kind of sit back and say, Mom and Dad love me so much, And I have been such an awesome son that I have been rewarded with 2 packs of Oreos. And I'm going to glorify God. I'm going to glorify my parents by eating 2 of everything they gave me. That's called the prosperity gospel. Or would you hope instead that your son takes the second Lunchable and stealthily finds a place that he can hide it in case tomorrow you forget about him? And now if you forget, he's got a spare lunch saved up and he is ready for a rainy day. Is that what you hope he does? Or are you most pleased if instinctively he hands the extra lunch stuff to the kid who has none? Now, if he did that, would you say, well, my kid will never be rich because he doesn't know how to save? There goes the whole free market system right there up in smoke. No, my guess is that you would be supremely pleased that his instinct was to share and not to hoard, because you know that you're gonna pack another lunch for him tomorrow and he's got nothing to worry about. So why would you think God is pleased when we pile up all of our money in extravagance in case God doesn't take care of us tomorrow? God made you wealthy, James says to the rich, to give so you can meet the needs around you now. To him that sees good that he ought to do and does it not, to that person it is sin. He prospers you not so you can increase your standard of living. He prospers you so that you can also increase your standard of giving. At the Summit Church, we teach that 3 words ought to characterize your giving in light of that. Number 1 is the word priority. And that just means that giving should come out first, not last. It is literally the first thing Veronica and I do with our paycheck every single month. We call it the first fruits, what the Bible calls it. It just goes out. You say, wait, no. I mean, if I did that, I wouldn't be able to make ends meet. Now listen, all I can tell you is I've done this now for 40 years and God has never once not let ends meet in my life. And I've heard countless testimonies in this church of people who have experienced the exact same thing. He promised multiple places in our Bibles that if you put him first, he will make sure that you are sufficient in all the rest of your needs. In Malachi, God says to test him in this. Put me to the test, he says, and just see if I won't be faithful in coming through for you. You put me first. Here's the second word, percentage. Percentage. One of the ways you can bring discipline to your giving is by setting a percentage each month. We're not talking about just throwing in your lunch money into the plate whenever the pastor talks about it because you feel guilty. Tithe literally means 10%, and that is a great starting point for us. But that leads me to the third word, progressive. Priority, percentage, progressive. As God prospers us, we are to increase that percentage year by year. Veronica and I were given 10% when we were bootstrapping it as new college graduates. But now that we have more means, we have year by year tried to progress our percentage. I would encourage you to consider the same. Let's return to our central thread. Our lives are fleeting, forgettable, and fragile. Thus, we should live lives that are characterized by humility, eternity, and immediacy with money and in all other areas. Only the fool lives as if this mist is all there is. Only the fool lives for this little red segment when you know that there's an eternity behind it that is longer than you could possibly imagine. Live for eternity, and we have an incredible model in doing so. Jesus, who used his brief stint on earth not to pile up treasure and power, but to pour his life out as a sacrifice for joy. For joy, the writer of Hebrews tells us, Jesus endured the cross with joy. He embraced the sacrifice, despising its shame. Despising its shame means he didn't even think about it. It seemed like nothing to him because he knew the sacrifice, the pain was just temporary, but the people he was saving were eternal. That's how you should live. You've got only a few brief moments before sunset to earn these victories that we're going to experience for eternity. Only 2 things in life last forever, the word of God and the souls of people. So build your life on them.